last week's class. Last week we went through a lot of the drama, where Rus is alone in the threshing ground, and Boaz wakes up, and Rus makes these overtures and demands, and Boaz doesn't respond yet. We didn't hear about Boaz's response. But there was one detail which we really didn't deal with adequately. So I'm going to focus today on that detail. It's almost like a technical detail. It's not going to be a dramatic class. This is going to be a very technical class. The overarching, if you will, theme is Rus seeking Boaz's hand in marriage. Right? That's what's really going on here. And it's a very unusual thing, and it's kind of off the rails, it's off the charts. It doesn't fit the typical expected path for Boaz to take, or really maybe for Rus to take. And as we explained in great detail last week, that's why sometimes things which are beyond the pale of the everyday and the ordinary require extraordinary circumstances to make them happen. And that was kind of like the segue into what's really happening here between Boaz and Rus. So let's zero into verse 10. Actually, verse 9. In verse 9, Boaz is surprised, frightened. Who is this? And Rus reassures him, it is I. And she indicates that she would like for him to take her in marriage. Ufarasta chnofecha al masecha, you will spread your garment over your maidservant. With great humility she speaks. And the last three words are, Ki goel oto, because you are a redeemer. And these are the three words we're going to focus on today. In Hebrew, the word ki means because. Now, ki could mean a number of things, but certainly here, the key to understanding the word ki is that this is the reason. You should do this ki, because. You should marry me, I'm Rus, you should marry me because goel. You have a lot of editing to do. What does that mean? What does it mean because you're a redeemer? Say, you should marry me because you're a husband. You should marry me because, I don't know, you have a duty. Who is being redeemed? Who is in exile and who seeks redemption? Why does she choose those words? What exactly does she mean? So Rashi says something very unusual. He says, Ki goel ata, because you are a redeemer, and you need to understand that on a literal level, this simply doesn't seem to make any sense. So Rashi says, Ki goel ata, because you're a redeemer, ligoel nachalas ishi, to redeem the real estate of my husband, my erstwhile husband. Rus is a widow. Her husband Machlon has died. He owned fields. The fields now are in other people's hands, and they have to be redeemed. And there is this concept in the end of the book of Leviticus of ancestral homelands in our eternal homeland in Eretz Yisrael. And there's this homestead of the family. And if somebody sells property, it's appropriate for it to be redeemed and restored to its original owners. So there's this notion of redemption. The Torah uses the terminology redemption. In the end of the book of Leviticus, the Torah says, Geula titnu la'aretz, that the land should be redeemed. Now, real estate doesn't go anywhere. It's always in the same place. We tend to think of redemption as somebody being in one area in which they're inhibited, and then they're redeemed or taken out of that, like redeeming a captive, like redeeming somebody in exile. Like Moses is the Goel, he's the redeemer. He redeemed us from Egypt and slavery. So we seem to think of leaving a situation or leaving a place. But the truth is, when you talk about real estate, you certainly don't go anywhere. And circumstances don't change anything for the real estate per se. There's nothing that's being released. You can't lock up a piece of land. So what is the meaning of redemption? So Rashi says, this is the concept of redeeming an estate so that it be restored to its original owners. And that the terminology redemption shows up in the Torah. Shenemar. And here Rashi quotes a verse which is not just, broadly speaking, indicative that real estate can be redeemed, but specifically that a closest of kin, that a relative should busy himself or bother redeeming the real estate. Rashi says, the pasuk states, "Uva goy aloi hakorev elov," the one who is close, the relative that's close to him, v'goal v'goymer, and he'll redeem. And this is talking about real estate. So Rus came to speak to Boaz about marriage. See, he insinuates that she's here for marriage by saying the words "ufarasta chnofecha la'amoscha." She's not saying, I'm cold. It'd be nice if you could spread your blanket over me and warm me up a little. She means more than just the corner of her garment. This is euphemism, but it's very lurid and clear euphemism. So she kind of goes off and says, and you know why you should do this? Ki goyalata, because there's a real estate deal that has to be kind of put together. So Rashi goes on to explain, V'chamoisi v'ani, my mother-in-law and I, we have to sell the property off because we can't work the fields. So this is, in those days, it was more of a masculine thing to work the fields. You have to sell the property off. V'ata alecha liknes. Since we have to sell, you should be the one to buy because you're closest of kin. So if we sell it and it belongs to us, if it gets sold to, the highest bidder, a different tribe, a different family. Then the land irrevocably moves from the estate of Yehuda or from the family of my husband and my children, meaning, this is what Naomi would say, from her husband, Elimelech, from the children, Machlon, and then it's gone. So you should be the one to redeem it. You should be the one to buy it. Knei gam oisi ima. And once you're buying the land, you may as well buy my wife too. Like, you're buying a house, buy a lady too. Like, come on, acquire it all. Get the whole thing. Now, we know that sounds a little funny, so Rashi goes on to say, it doesn't just mean buy one, get one for free. It means, so that the name of the deceased will be remembered over his real estate. How will the name of the deceased be remembered? The deceased name is Machalon. Boaz has a different name. Yeah, he's related, so what? You don't even know they had last names in those days anyway. How would that be? So Rashi says, Rus states, Kisha Avay al Hasada, I'll come to this field, because if I'm married to you, and you're owning the field now, I'll come to the field. And we come to the field, Yoimru, they'll say, Zois Eishes Machalin. This is the wife, this is somebody else's wife. It's a great marriage proposal. You should marry me. So when you marry me, they'll say, this is somebody else's wife. This was the wife, this is the widow of Machalon. So really, this is a very hard Rashi to swallow. Something like, it's like almost unwieldy. It's like the logic is hard to follow. First of all, she says, please marry me. You know why? Because there's some real estate. It's got to be sold and you should buy it. And then if you buy it when I go to the field, then they'll say I'm somebody else's wife. And that way, he'll have a memory. So therefore you should go and marry me. It's like a circular logic that's not exactly lining up. And this is what I'm going to try to explain to you today. Try to give us a little bit of an appreciation, understanding for why Rashi says that, what he means. I mean, the Ibn Ezra simply says, Ki goyel ata, ki chen mishpat kol Yisrael. That's the way it's supposed to be. Really? No, that's what he says. That's it. He gidali nami. My mother-in-law said so. That's a really good reason for somebody to marry me. You marry me because my mother-in-law said you should. But that's what the Ibn Ezra says. Now, of course, the Ibn Ezra may be alluding to what Rashi says, because there may be a reason that Naomi gave. But he doesn't go into that. So Rashi takes it upon himself to try to explain this enigma of Ki Goyel Ota, because you are a redeemer. Now, Rabbi Yosef Karo, in his commentary, he says that Rus is trying to say, I'm not here on a mission of lust, I'm here on a mission of business. In other words, this is not about romance. It's not about craving love. I'm here because there's a rhyme and reason. There's business to be taken care of. So she says, you should marry me. Ufarasta knofecha la'amoscha. You should spread your garment over me, because this is a business-like thing. When we say business, it doesn't have to be where there's profit or loss or money. People would say, what is your business here? What are you doing here? Do you have a legitimate reason? It's almost like she's giving legitimacy to something which doesn't seem legitimate. The whole thing seems illegitimate.
Isn't that something like Yibum when some...
We'll talk about Yibum. Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a minute. Yes. If it's Yibum, if it's Levirate, why wasn't she say, Ki Yava Mata? So say, because you're the Levirate. You're the person, you have a responsibility, you have a mitzvah in the Torah. She didn't say that. She said, Ki Goyalata. So this, of course, is the key to understanding the key, right? Because the key, the natural reason would be, marry me because you're supposed to marry me. She doesn't say that. She says, marry me because it's legitimate. That's what Rabbi Yosef Karo says. I mean, just to put his words. And he says, Ramza shalei bas l'shem znus chas v'sham. She did not come with licentious intentions, heaven forfend. Elo l'shem nisuin. She came for marriage. This is about legitimacy. So she says, ufarasta knofecha ala moscha ki goyal ata, because it's a legitimate thing to do. It's almost like the right thing to do. She's making the moral case for why you should do this. But this has to be understood. And clearly this is what Rashi is getting at when Rashi explains this whole business of land being redeemed and so on and so forth. So the Be'er Mayim kind of picks up where Rashi leaves off, and he elucidates Rashi a little bit. I want to share with you his explanation of the words of Rashi. He says, it was impossible for Rus to say, you are obligated to marry me because of the mitzvah of Yibum, because there's a Levirate situation. She couldn't say that. Do you know why she couldn't say that? Because it wasn't true. Because Boaz was actually not under any responsibility to marry her. There is no Levirate mitzvah per se here. The mitzvah in the Torah of a Levirate marriage is that the brother will marry his brother's widow. That's the mitzvah. There is not a mitzvah for any relative to marry. So it doesn't make sense to say, Ki yavam ata, because you weren't a yavam. Okay, so why are you speaking about real estate? So Rus is kind of making the case. She says, it's not as if you have no connection to me. It's not as if you don't have anything to do with my erstwhile husband. You do have some business with my erstwhile husband. You do have some kind of redemption to effect. What you should be effecting is saving his land from going somewhere else, ensuring that this land, and the land of Israel, is very special to us, and clearly from the Torah's many laws of land that may be redeemed, and the land reverting back to its original owner. It's important for the right tribe and right family to be on its specific land. They're not mutually exclusive. The souls of people and the land they're supposed to reside in are not necessarily two disparate realities, especially when we talk about the land of Israel, Eretz Yisrael. So there is a redemption in effect. You do kind of owe something to my husband. You do have some kind of moral obligation to do something to bring solace to my husband's soul. And where do you see that? You see that in the redemption of real estate. So the Be'er Mayim says, what Rus was essentially saying to Boaz is, since you are a redeemer in effect, redeemer here would be a legal term. She's not saying you're a redeemer, you're a Messiah. She says you're legally poised to redeem the land. Now, if you're poised to redeem Machlon's land, that means you have a certain connection, a bond with the soul of Machlon. You can actually effect some kind of redemption. So if you can redeem his land, so then why can't you kind of redeem his soul that's stuck in me too? We talked about this last week. The Alshich explains how Rus says she has this possession within her. She's possessed by another soul. There's multiple souls. Now, we talked about 3 souls in one, or 2 souls. She felt maybe she was also the soul being reincarnated of the daughter of Lot, who fathered Moab, because she's a Moabite. And that's why it said it with a segol, if you remember, right? That's why it says Amosecha. The first time it says Amosecha, a segol has 3 dots under the tuf. And the 3 dots stand for the daughter of Lot, Machalon, and Rus. And she says, at very least, Ufarasta chnofecha ala moscha, here it's amoscha, not amasecha. Amoscha, here the tuf has not 3 dots, but 2 dots. She says, even if I'm not a reincarnation of the daughter of Lot, even if there's not what Lot started way back when, and that was clearly heavenly ordained, even if that's not the case, at least there's a responsibility, not just towards me, but towards the soul that's kind of attached to me. We talked about this a number of classes back, about the idea of removal of the shoe, how the shoe represents the residence of the soul, and this woman is still connected to the husband who died, and she needs to be freed. And the soul needs to be freed, more importantly. So basically what Rus is saying, you are a redeemer of sorts. The Torah calls you a redeemer. Now, I understand that's a legal terminology, and it's talking about real estate. I get that. But since the Torah uses terminology of redemption, even though it's about real estate, and it's my husband's real estate, and my husband then... Just 416-870-1540. And you have to edit it later. I'm sorry, Zelda changed her hour, so... She used to be on 10 to 11, and now she's on 11 to 12. So... 876-1540? Yeah. And when she's ready, go hand the phone. The people who are watching live will get an extra broadcast. 870-1540. That's so weird. It's not going? All circuits are busy. Yeah. Okay, so when you're ready, we'll do it. You have 2 minutes? Okay. So then the point that's being made here, now we understand the point that's being made. Now they're starting to make sense to us. This business of real estate, this is the key goelata. The goel, and it's not mutually exclusive from the marriage. I mean, it's like part of the issue is here, the way the verse is construed. If it was all about real estate, it should have said, I'm Rus. There's property to be redeemed. And by the way, could you marry me too? But of course, if Boaz is only half normal, he would say to her, excuse me, you came here at midnight to uncover my feet and scare me half to death to make a real estate deal? I mean, we could have just had a real estate agent call us. But it's not why you came. And those who say, well, I know, I didn't really come just for real estate. Well, why don't you say what you're here for? So the truth is that Rus is not so worried about the real estate. And furthermore, as the Be'er Mayim Ches says, the whole din of Geula is not really even her responsibility because she's a convert. If anybody, this would be the responsibility of her mother-in-law, of Naomi. So Rus has to go on a kamikaze crazy mission in the middle of the night, waking up this guy who could curse her and call the police and who knows what he could do to her to help out her mother-in-law. If her mother-in-law wants so badly to redeem the field, the mother-in-law come and make a business proposition. Most of the times when it comes to real estate, if there's an offer that can't be refused, it won't be refused. So if you were so desperate to make sure that he buys the field, sell it to him at a discount. That's the easy way to get a business deal done. But she doesn't do that. So it would make no sense for Rus to introduce this as a real estate transaction. What does make sense is for Rus to say, I'm looking for marriage. But I'm here legitimately. I'm looking for marriage. But I'm here legitimately. And the legitimate reason is ki goyal ata. Because you are a redeemer. So if you are a redeemer, then we have a connection. So if you're redeeming real estate, it's not mutually exclusive. And here Rashi says something interesting. He introduces this business of Rus showing up on the field and say, oh, that used to be Machlon's wife. In other words, even if there isn't an actual mitzvah of Yibum in which somebody would actually be called the name of the deceased, nonetheless, at least he's not totally forgotten. At least somebody should be remembered in this world. In this way, he's remembered. Why? Because it's the right piece of real estate. It's Machlon's real estate. And who's presiding over the real estate? Machlon's widow. So Machlon is not somebody who once lived and is now forgotten forever.
Rabbi Kaplan, how do you feel about what's going on in Israel and what you see happening here in the United States and Canada as well?
Good morning, Zelda. I feel about what's happening in Israel probably like most of my Jewish brethren around the world, deeply pained and frustrated. It boggles the mind as to why Israel continues to put up with this incredibly horrific behavior, allowing half the country to be thrown into disarray, over 100 people wounded, 4 lives tragically snuffed out, and we seem to do nothing but bomb empty buildings. But you know, Zelda, when I was a child, I once heard the following. Somebody once said, those who talk don't know what they're talking about, and those who know what they're talking about don't talk. I would like to think and hope that the Prime Minister and his cabinet know what they're doing. I don't know that they do. And I don't know that they aren't motivated by fear, but I would like to think that that's the case.
Well, I'm sure that Prime Minister Netanyahu and the people in the army and wherever are doing whatever they can, but it isn't enough.
I'm not sure of anything. I'm not sure they're doing what they have to do. I'm not sure so. I have to tell you, when I lived in Israel, Zelda, one of the interesting things was that the army couldn't make blanket statements that because half the country is in the army. And you can't fool people when they actually know what's going on. Most of the people who live in Israel, citizens of Israel, either served in the army, are still on active reserve duty, or served in the army. They were in active reserve duty. And as such, they more or less have a very clear understanding of what's going on. So you can't sell them a bill of goods. And I don't know. In Israel, there are many questions being asked, and many people who are saying that what's happening is not right. I certainly don't know. I can hope. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that the Prime Minister Netanyahu is doing the right thing. I'm not sure that the cabinet is making the right decisions. Like I said, we can hope. But then again, armchair quarterbacking from across the great big Atlantic is also an easy thing to do. It's easy for us to sit here and tell people how they have to respond and what they have to do. I never was a member of the military. I never saw any action on the field, and I never even studied military strategy. So the truth is, like, as I started out, I speak to you as most Jews in the world speak to you, Jews who care about Israel. And unfortunately, Jews who don't care, but most Jews do care. So as somebody who cares, there's a deep sense of angst and frustration, and you know, there's a worry and an anxiety that things aren't being done as they should be, and at any rate, it isn't a good situation. That's for sure.
I don't think that we here should, play God and as you said, make constant decisions about Israel when they're the ones in the situation they are. All we have to do is be here for them and try to do everything we can to be of help.
I don't think anybody's playing God. I think they're playing Prime Minister. And as I think it was Golda Meir who once said to the president at the time, "You may be the president of a 250 million, but I am the prime minister over 4 million prime ministers." This is like a Jewish thing, Zelda. You know, we're just like everybody else, only a little more so. And
We have an expert that will be joining us in a few minutes to talk more about it.
all right. Well, I'm certainly not an expert about these matters, but Zelda, this I will tell you. I wholeheartedly agree that it's really not our job to lecture the Israeli government and tell them what to do. It is our job to do what we can. And on the surface, there's precious little that we actually can do. However, what we must know is that our sages tell us that the Jewish people are metaphorized as a single entity, a single organism. And therefore, the health in one area necessarily affects the health in another part of the body. If the blood flow is interrupted in the hand, the foot, or perhaps even the heart will suffer. And when I talk about the blood flow, it's a metaphor for spiritual energy that God gives us. Barcheinu Avinu, we ask that God bless us, kulanu ke'echad, all as one. And the only thing that really unites us is Torah and mitzvahs. Otherwise, we argue about just about everything else under the sun. One thing we can do is study more Torah, perform an extra mitzvah, and to pray. And I do believe, Zelda, with all my heart and soul, that the prayers we offer, the mitzvot we do, and the Torah we study can, and I hope, is going to make a difference. Let us pray and let us be optimistic that we will hear, Be'ezrat Hashem, good news. May Hashem comfort those who are cowering, and those who have been injured, and the families of those who have been senselessly slain. And hopefully we will be hearing and sharing good news. The best news of all, Zelda, would be that none of us has to play Prime Minister, because Mashiach will play that role. Bring us all home to Eretz Yisrael, ushering in true peace and prosperity for Am Yisrael and all of humankind, b'mheira u'biyameinu, speedily and in our days. Amen.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Kaplan, joining us now.
So now we're starting to appreciate the cadence of these verses. Ruth has to make her case. The case is, I want to get married. But she has to give that legitimacy. Here's a beautiful single woman, comes to an older man. She uncovers his feet in the middle of the night. You want to marry me? This is about as illegitimate a circumstance as possible. So the legitimacy, the logic is ki goyalata. And Boaz is very brilliant, and he may be in the middle of his sleep, but he knows all these halachas, and he knows this concept, and he instantaneously understands what Ruth is saying. So this helps us to understand and appreciate a little bit of what's going on here. Now I think it's helpful if I share with you the words of Nachmanides, of Ramban, in Parshas Vayeshev, where we read about an ancestor, an ancestress of Boaz. The ancestor is the progenitor of the tribe, whose name is Yehuda. Yehuda had 3 children. 2 of them died prematurely. They were married to a woman whose name was Tamar. Yehuda didn't want his 3rd son, Shelah, to marry Tamar. So after Er and Onan died, Yehuda kind of sent her off and said, yeah, figure it out. Stay out of my way. And Tamar realized that she was just being cast aside. So Tamar, like Rus, did some very unusual things. And what was Tamar looking for? Tamar also was legitimate. And Tamar also was seeking redemption. And Tamar was seeking to attach herself to the family of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and ultimately to bear children to Yehuda. She does. Twins. One's name is Zarach, and one's name is Peretz. By the way, Peretz is a direct ancestor of Boaz. And from Peretz comes David HaMelech, and from Peretz comes Mashiach. So this notion of Levirate marriage, which isn't exactly as per the Torah's instructions, is not a novel concept. We find this in the Torah already. Nachmanides deals with a statement that's made where Yehuda uses the terminology. It's the first time the terminology of Levirate shows up. V'yabe Moisa. He says to Onan, I want you to marry your brother Er's widow. V'hakim zera la'achicha. And then you'll be able to establish progeny for your brother. So Rashi says, what does that mean? How is Er going to have progeny established through Onan? Onan is Onan, Er is Er. They're 2 different people. So Rashi says, Haben yikare al shem hameis. The child could be called by the name of the deceased. And Ramban, he uses some very sharp language. He says, Rashi, that's not true. I'm not exaggerating. He says, Ein ze emet. It's not true. He says, we see multiple examples of Levirate marriages in the Torah, even non-typical and conventional Levirate marriages, and the name of the child is not like the name of the deceased. What's the perfect example? Rus fathers a child together with, or Rus has a child that's fathered by Boaz. Her husband's name was Machalon. She was seeking redemption of Machalon's soul. So what should the child have been named? Yeah, but it's not. The child was named Ovid. If she's seeking redemption and she wanted to do something for her husband's soul, so name the child. So Ramban says, like Rashi, what are you saying? But really the question is not, it's not a halacha. Rashi's not saying it's a halacha that the child father has to be. He's giving us a graphic or classic example, just like the example he gives us here in Megillat Ruth, where she will come. People say, that's Machlon's widow. In other words, he's giving ear to something on a very literal level. It doesn't mean there isn't more to it. But of course, people like us who don't see more to it will say, come on, tell me this mystical, spooky stuff of souls transmigrating and souls living on. I don't know what that means. I'm a regular bread and potatoes person. I understand real things. I can sink my teeth into it. I can hold it in my hand. If I can see it with my eyes, it's real. And you're telling me about mysticism. So Rashi says it's not so hard to even see this literally. How? Rus will show up on the field. People say, Rus, she's Machlon's. Why doesn't Rashi say that the child will be called Machlon? Because it doesn't need the child to be called Machlon, because here there's actually a widow and a piece of land. And the piece of land means that a person is not forgotten. Here is the point. There is no doubt that we deal here with some very deep and profound spiritual implications. The realm of souls. There's no question that that's being dealt with over here. Right? Go back to the Alshach's teaching, the 3 dots, the 2 dots. She's possessed. This is heavy stuff. It's heady stuff. But it can also be understood literally. Do you know what the repository, the Jewish people's repository for the Holocaust in Israel, what's it called? Yep. It's called Yad Vashem. Where did they get the name Yad Vashem? It's a biblical expression. God says that He will give the people who can't have children a Yad Vashem, a hand and a name. It's a biblical euphemism for a memory. The people who killed in the Holocaust, they never had the children. 1.5 million children killed, never got married. All these people, entire families wiped off the face of the earth. Many families didn't have a single survivor. Some families had 1 or 2 survivors. Whole families. Nuclear families of 100 souls. Not a single survivor. Nothing. So when you have a situation like that where entire villages, entire families are wiped out, so the people who created this repository, I'm loath to call it a museum, this repository of information to be preserved for posterity, they naturally called it Yad Vashem, because Yad Vashem means to be remembered. Believe it or not, the soul wants to be remembered here on earth. The soul wants to be remembered. The soul takes delight and pleasure in the fact that it is remembered. What do we do to honor the souls that have passed into the other world? What do we naturally do? We name our children. Do you know that that's the nicest and most beautiful thing you can do for a neshama that's passed on? That's a living memorial. And invariably, once that continues, so people remember the person that they're named after, and maybe the person that one's named after, and maybe the person that one's named after. It creates like almost a continuity in a family. You can see this in certain families where the name is recurring. The name keeps showing up. Think of the famous family of Hillel. We got 2 Hillels. We got 2 Gamliels. We got 2 Shimons. We got 2 Yehudas. So the name is a recurring name. And it actually makes sense. It actually adds up in a very literal way. People put plaques in shuls. Why do people put plaques in shuls? Because they feel that the shul is a place that represents the presence of Hashem. Why don't they put a plaque in their house? Nobody will charge them anything. They can't complain the shul's ripping them off. Put a plaque on your wall. Plaque on my, what's a plaque on my wall? A plaque on the Hashem's house, plaque on the shul's house. Now that's meaningful. They'll create organizations, dedicate books. They'll do things, right? Because you want to create a memory. That's legitimate. It's not only legitimate for the survivor, it's not only legitimate for the family, it's legitimate for the soul. People write a Sefer Torah. They do things to memorialize. It's legitimate. It's real. And the neshama has nachas from this. I know a wealthy person who built a shul. Literally, not a huge shul, built a shul. And he said to me, when I go to that shul, I feel like I'm going to my parents' house. He said, because I have my parents' name on it. He said, thank God, he could afford to build a shul. And he provided all the seed money, got the shul. He says, my father mother lived there. That's how I feel when I go to visit my parents. It's not even his shul, but he goes to visit his parents. It's not unreasonable. So the point that Rashi makes here, Rashi translates something into a way that a child should understand. Ramban speaks about holy stuff. He invokes Kabbalah and mysticism. Rashi wrote his commentary first and foremost for children. And there's plenty of grown-up children too. You talk to them in mysticism and they're like, what are you talking about? I know what that means. I never saw souls. I never heard them. I can't touch them. I barely understand. I don't know what you're talking about. So Rashi gives you a very literal example. He's a child. A child has a name. We all know what that means. Every one of us knows children who have names of somebody. A person comes to a piece of real estate. It's like a plaque on the wall. A piece of land in Israel. A piece of land in Israel. So now we know what's going on here. You come to this land, say, that's Machlon. That's Machlon's widow. She married Boaz. So Machlon is not forgotten because Boaz owns the land, and people remember this was Machlon. Machlon didn't have children, but because of Machlon, this woman Ruth, this beautiful Moabite princess, became a Jew, and she converted and joined the Jewish people. You see, because of Machlon, now Boaz is here, and now this land is reconstituted. It actually makes a lot of sense. And the redemption of the real estate does lead to redemption of the soul. But let me just share with you what Ramban says. Ramban says that, he said it's not a mitzvah to call the name. He said that it's much deeper than that. He said that's not what it's about. Really what's going on here, he says, Sod Godol. This is a great mystery. And that's compatible with Ramban's interpretation. His commentary is written mysteriously. It's a great mystery, he says, a great secret in the Sodot HaTorah. And he says, this means that people who have a name and people who have eyes and ears to see, to know and understand, were able to understand and appreciate that it is a to'elet, that is a great benefit for the soul of the deceased who did not leave progeny behind. It's a great benefit to create some kind of circumstances which necessarily propagate the person that once lived. It becomes an extension. It becomes like the heir of. It becomes an extension. And he says, really and truly, who would be the ideal individual to set that up? Because what we seek to create is some kind of continuity. We're seeking to create some kind of inheritance of sorts. Who would be most naturally poised to create a subsequent memorial, if you will, or a family that would propagate the memory? Who would be the most natural one? An heir. A person who's already connected because they're already part of the inheritance. It's natural. This makes perfect sense. And that helps us understand what's going on here. So Ruth says, I want you to marry me. And Boaz will say, why should I marry you? I'm 40 years older than you. I've had my children ready. They're all grown up. You're a beautiful young princess. Go find a Prince Charming and enjoy life. What do you want from me? He says, no, because kigoyalata. Because there's a connection between us. Because there's a familial relationship. And you could be the one to redeem that field. And when you redeem that field, that's the legitimacy here. Just starts to make sense. And this is something that the Tosfos Rid says very interesting. The Bishaya Detrani says, he says, Min HaTorah, there was no obligation for Boaz to redeem that field. He's not closest of kin even. So why did you say Kigoyalato? Kigoyal doesn't mean you're obligated. Ruth did not have anything on Boaz. She couldn't come along and say, you owe this to me. Because he didn't. You must do so and so. It's the moral thing to do with the weight of those words of moral or mitzvah obligation. Boaz says, I'm not responsible. He says, I know you're not responsible. I know you don't have to. But you could be. Ki goyal ato doesn't mean you have to. You could redeem the field. And if you can redeem the field, then you should redeem the field. And if you're redeeming the field, then you're the heir. Then you're the one who ensures that Machlon is not forgotten. And the most natural thing is you should marry me. It just makes sense. It's just, this is a legitimate thing. I know I'm coming in the middle of the night, parachuted in. This looks crazy. I'm here very legitimately. It's just, it's a little far-fetched, and we have to do this in an unusual way. But now let me make the case. Once you understand all this, then you can use, let's just say unconventional language. The unconventional allusion here. According to the Meshiv Nefesh, Ruth is saying to Boaz, why him? First of all, there is a closer relative. We're going to hear about him soon. And Boaz says, I'm not even the closest of kin. There's somebody closer. If he abdicates, if he passes, then I'll step in, which is what happens. But Ruth is saying to Boaz, I want it to be you, because according to your greatness, and he was a great man, he's a great person, very pious, and because he had this incredible Torah knowledge, but more so than his own personal Torah knowledge was the fact that he was illuminating the nation. He taught Torah to the nation. So I believe, she said, that it's from you that will come redeemers. Ki goyal ata means that there's redemption in your DNA. Who's the redeemer that comes from this union? Mashiach eventually, but first David. And David is called a Goel. David is called a redeemer. He redeemed the Jewish people during very difficult times. And there were many, many redeemers from this bloodline, including, of course, the great redeemer that we all wait for and anticipate the coming of Mashiach. So that's the Ki Goyal Ata. It's more than just real estate, but this is only after Rashi makes the case and explains it literally, then you can go beyond the real estate. Then you can look at the mystery and the metaphor and the spirituality and the deep history and the glorious future and the prophetic tradition. All these things come into play, but first there has to be, say bread and butter. First, you got to have a foundation. First it has to make sense in a literal way. And that's, of course, what Rashi seeks to do. He creates the legitimacy in a very literal level. And from there, it's able to be developed. So I want to suggest that these two very different realities are not nearly as disparate as one might think. I would like to suggest to you that actually they're very close to one another. And this is how I'm going to make that suggestion. But before I do that, I just do want to point out that if you look ahead in the book of Ruth, in the 4th chapter, it says in verse 5, Vayomer Boaz bayom kanotcha hasadeh miyad Naomi, on the day that I buy this field from the hands of Naomi, ume'et Ruth from Moavit, from Ruth to Moavit, eshet hamet kanita lahakim shemamet al nachalaso. Then I have acquired the wife of the dead to establish his name. So in other words, later on, for Rashi to ignore the real estate and just talking about mysticism just doesn't jibe with the verses. Because literally speaking, the verses emphasize real estate. And Boaz makes that statement later on. So it wasn't just something that Ruth said, Boaz accepts this. And this logic becomes the foundation of Boaz's strategy. He says, this is what I'm going to do. And this is how I'm going to do it. All right. So let's say, to be fair, that we have established two very different narratives here. A very literal narrative, a narrative of real estate redemption, a narrative of some kind of technical connection, and then a spiritual, mystical tapestry about souls and redemption. They don't seem on the surface to be connected to one another. So in order to help us understand this, I want to point you back in history to a statement which is made in the Torah, to interpretation on that statement, which seems to be even more disparate than real estate and souls. Even more disparate. And I'm going to take you back now to a dark night. Not the dark night in the threshing field, a different dark night. This was a dark night where nobody was looking for marriage. But they were looking for some peace and quiet. And there was the anticipation that war would be made on the morrow. The name of the protagonists here are Yaakov and Esau. On a dark night before Yaakov and Esau meet, it says, Vayevater Yaakov levado. Yaakov remained alone. Do you know what happens when he remains alone? He gets attacked. This angel or creature attacks him. And they wrestle all night. And he dislocates Yaakov's limbs. And then in the morning, you have this conversation. He says, okay, I'm done wrestling with you. Now I've dislocated you. Like, let me go now. And Yaakov says, sure, I'll let you go. That was a great night. But first tell me your name, would you? The whole thing is like so outlandish, really. But I'm not going to get into that. I'm going to talk about this idea of Vayevaser Yaakov levado. Incidentally, there are explanations for all this. It does make sense. It's not as haphazard as it sounds. But Vayevaser Yaakov levado, the Medrash says, and this is the Bereishis Rabbah, right on the spot, Medrash says, Ma HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What does it say about God? V'niskav Hashem levado. The Mashiach will come. It says God then will be separate, alone. God will be alone. He used the word levado. Af Yaakov, Vayevaser Yaakov levado. That's what Medrash Rabbah says. God will be alone. That's how we describe the Messianic coming. Yaakov experienced a Messianic flowering of sorts. He was alone. He was exalted. He was in his mind and in his heart, in his soul, he was already living in a Messianic reality. It's pretty impressive. I don't know what it means, but it sounds really good. Right? Yaakov's levado. He was head and shoulders above everybody else. He was separate, taken onto his own special place. Conversely, we have a Gemara in Masechet Chulin on page 91 that says, Nishtayir al pachim ktanim. The Gemara asks the question, why did he stay alone? It's dangerous. It's late at night. You know that there's this monster you call a brother is coming to kill you. He could have sent somebody in advance. You don't stay alone. Why don't you stick together? So the Medrash says, well, Yaakov was worried about little things. He stayed over some tchotchkes. Nishtayir al pachim ktanim. And the Gemara goes on and says, Mikan letzadikim, now you should know for tzadikim, chaviv aleim amaynim yesem megufim. They're more worried about their residuals than about their own personal safety. Really? Tzadikim, that's the hallmark of tzadikim, that they're more worried about personal effects, things they spent a few dollars on, than their own personal safety, their risk to life. It's like Jack Benny's famous line, your money, your life, let me think about it. Well, what does that mean? And the Rebbe points out that besides what does that mean, the bigger question is, how do these two very, very different kinds of interpretations live in the same verses? Same word, levadai. One interpretation is speaking about Yaakov and the highest of levels being literally raised to messianic pre-consciousness. But Mashiach didn't come yet, but he's there already. And the other one is, he's just a stingy guy. He's counting his pennies. Very rich man, by the way. Enormously wealthy. Torah says before, but he had an unbelievable amount of success. But it's some stuff from the dollar store. You don't want to leave that behind. It's not complimentary. It doesn't sound big-minded. It doesn't sound expansive. It doesn't sound messianic per se. You're counting pennies like that. It sounds petty. So the two interpretations couldn't seem further apart. The Rebbe comes along and says, it's not so. They're actually saying the same thing. How? The Rebbe tells us, take a look in a collection of teachings attributed to the Baal Shem Tov, which is called Keter Shem Tov. Now, we don't know the exact verbiage that the Baal Shem Tov used. He spoke in Yiddish generally, not in Hebrew. The writing here is all in Hebrew. But we do know that it's accurate. The writings of Keter Shem Tov are accurate recordings of the Baal Shem Tov's teachings. In the 218th entry of the book of Keter Shem Tov, it states that when there's this rule in the Torah, HaTorah chasa al mamonim shel Yisrael, the Torah busies itself with the residuals of the Jewish people. In other words, there's a principle which comes to play in halacha. And the principle is, God worries about your pennies. So if there's going to be a loss of finances, if your residuals will take a hit, then the halacha could be modified. So the Baal Shem Tov said, why is that important? V'lama kach, why is it so? Why? Why does Torah worry about pennies? Is it really true that Jews are stingy? Is it really true with penny pinching? So the Baal Shem Tov says, you must understand that anything a person wears or eats or uses, wears, eats, or uses. So we talked about the clothing, the food we eat, the environment we live in, the possessions we have. So the Baal Shem Tov, you think it's just about food or wardrobe? You think it's just about walls of real estate? Objects? He says, what are you really benefiting from when you eat or when you wear clothing? On a literal level, you're benefiting. I was hungry, now I'm not hungry anymore. On a literal level, I was cold, now I'm warm. On a deeper level, he says, no, it's not talking about being cold or hot or sated or hungry. You're benefiting from the spiritual sparks of that thing. That's really what's happening. That's why God made you hungry. And that's the teaching of the Alechem Levada Yichya Adam, Ki Kol Moitze Piavai Yichya Adam. In Parshas Ekev, the Arizal says, we don't just live by the literal bread, by the actual nuclear physics of bread. No. He says, Ki al kol moitze piavai. There's sparks of holiness. That's what's really going on here. So basing on that Lurianic teaching, the Baal Shem Tov said, when you wear, eat, or use something, what you're really wearing, eating, and using is the spiritual energy that was invested into it. There's a godly energy in everything. And when you use it well, what happens? You elevate the sparks. This is the real meaning of tikkun olam, not that souped-up baloney of liberal values called Judaism. This has nothing to do with Judaism. Judaism is Torah mitzvahs. That's what Judaism is. Judaism doesn't have to be reinvented. Judaism doesn't have to be recreated. I don't know if I shall laugh or cry when people post on Facebook, my Jewish values of tikkun olam. This is our Jewish value. What Jewish value? Which mitzvah is it? Now, one of the 613 mitzvahs is l'taken olam. Yeah, it's a pasuk in the Torah. What does it mean? Of course, it's a Torah principle. It's a Lurianic principle. It's a deep Kabbalistic principle. Simply stated, the principle is there are sparks of holiness and everything. And by utilizing things effectively and meaningfully, we redeem the sparks. Now, how do you think you use things meaningly and effectively? When it gives you meaning, or when you use it as Hashem intended it to be used? Do you think you eat non-kosher food and with this you're creating an elevation? You think with this you're fixing the world that God created? How could that be? God told you not to eat it. So you're fixing God's world by going against the will of God? That makes no sense. It's just illogical. If you're worried about God and you want to do what God wants, well then for heaven's sake, do what God wants. As one wise person said, which part of thou shalt not did you not understand? It required like a rocket science. God said do this. Rabbi, please, don't leave me alone with your tefillin. I'm into tikkun olam. What do you think tefillin is? The Baal Shem Tov goes on to say something fascinating. He says, you know, sometimes people lose items. He says, you know why you lost the item? On a deep way? Because the sparks that you were supposed to elevate were done. Your job was done. Do you know why something, he says, falls into disuse? Why it can't be used anymore? Because it's no longer useful. That's the sign. How do you know it's no longer useful? When it's no longer useful. If it's still useful, then for heaven's sake, then somebody's supposed to still do with it. Keep working on the sparks. What if it's useful for somebody else but not useful for me? So then it's not useful for me. That means now it's somebody else's sparks to elevate. I have no longer a use for it. I give it to you. You have a use for it. And when you use it, there's the sparks that you're supposed to elevate, because every one of us has unique sparks that are specially designed for our soul, which is the meaning of the Talmud statement that when you save a single life, it's like you save the whole world. Why? Because everybody has a unique spark to put together, or collection of sparks. And when one person is missing, who will elevate those sparks? It's a problem. If everybody comes with a few pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, and the giant jigsaw puzzle now is incomplete, why? The whole puzzle's incomplete, because somebody's missing those pieces. You save a life, you enable those pieces to go in the right place. You've completed the whole world. So this is what the Rebbe says based on his teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. The Rebbe says, you see what's going on over here? Do you know why tzaddikim is chavev aleim amoinam yesem igufim? Do you know why tzaddikim value their money so much? It's not because they're money. Because tzaddikim understand that if money belongs to them rightfully and lawfully, then it means there's sparks attached to it. They're really valuing godliness. When Yaakov Avinu was ready to sacrifice his own welfare, his own security, to elevate a few sparks, he was living messianic. That means to live messianic. To live messianic means to look at every detail of life and see it as a segue to spirituality. That's called to live Mashiach. Not that, I wonder what I'm doing here. How do I make this a little spiritual also? It's all spiritual. When Mashiach will come, the whole world will be spiritual. The whole world will be God. There will be nothing that's overtly different or separate from divinity. Now it is. And the fact that things now seem disparate from divinity is a symptom of the exilic reality we live in. And that will be changed when Mashiach comes. Yaakov is there already. Vayivasa Yaakov levadai, like Hashem levadai, he was there where he no longer saw dimes or nickels, quarters, loonies or toonies. What did he see? He saw holiness. Everything he looked at, he saw sparks of godliness. Everything he looked at, he saw mission and purpose. So, based on this teaching, the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, as the Rebbe explains it in Vayivasa Yaakov levado, so I would like to humbly suggest that maybe we can take the same ideas and apply them to the dark night here with Rus. This is the connection between the soul of Machlon and between real estate. Because really and truly, the soul of Machlon and the real estate are not mutually exclusive. What's the proof? The proof is that there is a need to redeem the field. If Machlon was done with the field, why redeem it? Why is it important for Machlon's name to be remembered? Because clearly Machlon still has something to contribute in this world. Not terrestrially, but spiritually. Not actually, but vicariously. By extension. Through his widow. Through Boaz buying the field. And what Rus is saying to Boaz is, if you could be a redeemer of the field, then you could be a redeemer of a soul too. Because field and soul are not mutually exclusive. If you can redeem the real estate, then you can marry me. It's equally legitimate. They're not mutually exclusive. Redeem the field. Redeem the field. Because by redeeming the field, you're restoring the sparks. You're creating wholesomeness. You're bringing solace to the soul. Marry me. So it actually is legitimacy. What's the legitimate mystical argument? Why should you spread your cloak over me? Ufarasta knofecha, why marry me? Ki goyalata. Because the business of redeeming the field isn't mutually exclusive. And so if you can affect Machlon soul on one level, you can affect the soul on the other level. If you can elevate his real estate, you can elevate me, his former wife, and in doing so, you'll bring the soul solace and serenity. And now it all, I think, makes a lot of sense. So, like a lot of things in Torah, you look at it on the surface, and it just doesn't seem to make any sense. It sounds like almost laughable. What? A story with real estate, that you marry me because you can get a real estate deal. But when you really delve into it a little bit, it makes perfect sense. And so Rus becomes a woman with a mission. She lives with a sense of destiny about her. As we learned previously, she feels that she's a continuation of the daughter of Lot, the ancestress of Moab. She's redeeming those original sparks from Avraham Avinu. She feels that Machlon has left within her sparks of holiness that are unique to Elimelech's family. And she believes that it is only through Boaz that these sparks can be redeemed and that a redeemer can be brought into the world. And indeed, it's through this union that the whole world in the end is going to be healed through the coming of Mashiach, who is the great, 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 great descendant of Rus, the righteous Rus. May it be speedily and in our days. Amen. That's pretty